organiser and activist of the Socialist Party. I'm also running for City Council in Hollingdean and Stanmer as part of TUSC, the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition. Before I came into this role, I was like you guys, and I was a student. At 22 years old, I decided that working a dead-end job in Sainsbury's in a small rural town for the rest of my life was not for me. And in 2015, I decided to go to Brighton University to do a degree in humanities at their Pavilion Parade campus. I studied at the University of Brighton for 3 years, and during that time, while my teachers were excellent, the conditions that prevailed over the rest of those 3 years were sad and tense. In first year, me and my housemates moved into private accommodation with the letting agent G4 Lets, because there weren't enough places in student halls. And that private accommodation was fucking disgusting and not fit for purpose. The house was damp, mouldy, drafty, and the result was that we were all sick and unwell for long periods of time that year, even in the summer. There were spiders and flies everywhere, there was insects in the furniture and in the bathrooms, and the garden was a mess when we moved in, and it never got sorted out for us to use. One bedroom was actually smaller than the legal requirement for a room to be considered a bedroom and rented out. In effect, G4 Lets and the landlord broke the law to rent that space to my friend. We paid £500 a month each for the privilege of living in this shithole. Then we moved into a different house, which was a little better, but still had issues with mould, with plaster falling off the ceiling, with washing machines that broke all the time, and there was no insulation in the bedroom that had been built as an extension as a means to squeeze in an extra person. And we still paid £500 a month for that fucking shithole as well. And while I was studying at uni, I suffered a lot with mental health issues like depression and anxiety, and I felt there was little support at the university to accommodate this. Certainly there was no help to be had for me or any other student that had mental health problems from the overburdened NHS mental health service in this city, which is already stretched to breaking point. On these personal issues, I feel the university I paid £9,000 a year to attend failed me as a student. I have to point out as well, it's clear that Brighton University management have made very obvious choices as to which courses will receive the lion's share of the funding and resources, primarily STEM courses at Moulscombe campus and not the humanities department at Pavilion Parade. This meant that there were limited resources for our class, including books and study spaces, as well as rooms to hold seminars. More than one person was disappointed because the course they wanted to do was pulled due to a lack of resources to cater to them. And even worse than that, on many courses that were oversubscribed, the university was turning to third-year students to teach first years. People weren't even graduated was teaching first years, and that actually fucking happened. This is what £9,000 a year gets you at Brighton University. Gets you fuck all.
Don't stand there, get some fuck all.
Yeah? Get a fucking grip of yourself.
Shut up,
I wasn't alone in facing a triple crisis of shitty living standards, shitty mental health, and shit access to resources. We all faced these problems collectively as a year group. And people complained and they were ignored. And they complained more and they were fobbed off with bullshit excuses and attempts to divide the students against each other so we couldn't present a united front. Deborah Humphreys, the Vice-Chancellor of Brighton University, demanded we elect leaders from amongst ourselves before she would deal with us. This was a move which was meant to frustrate us, take up our time and even cause a split between us. But the people that was complaining at this time resisted that move and stayed firm to the principle that they were all friends and equals and they had no leaders. And that group of friends eventually set up the Alternative Student Union, or the Alt-SU, which was radical and militant and was something that Deborah Humphreys could not ignore. They petitioned her, they met with her in person, and they put out our demands as a student body, and when she ignored all of that as well, they occupied her office, and they occupied the top floors of Mithras House, and they got into the building by pulling the fire alarm. And it was after they did this that a lot more people, including me, became involved, and the Alt-SU grew into a real organisation. The Alt-SU held marches and rallies on campus and in the streets of Brighton, and we shut down a student and parent open day by telling prospective parents of the students in exactly what life was like for a student at Brighton Uni, and it was lonely, stressful and a rip-off. And all of this was successful. When uni management tried to unilaterally renegotiate many of the contracts of PhD students who were also teaching for the uni at that time, it was collective action by staff and students which prevented this. But the main problem with student activism is that after 3 years, your activists leave and disperse to the four corners of the British Isles and the wider world. And this is what happened to the old SU. Because we didn't make links with the new students and build an organisational body, the old SU failed to become more than just a project launched by a group of friends. It was highly successful in its day, but it needed to be a lot more than what it was. I left Brighton in 2018 and I went to King's College in London to do my Masters, and I faced the same issues: high rents, poor mental health, so poor in fact that during this time I was on medication and feeling suicidal. On top of this, I was working a stressful and low-paid job at Sainsbury's to help make ends meet, and commuting over an hour into the central city to attend my courses. King's had a better attitude towards its students in terms of mental health, but that's because it had a lot more money to help fund its programmes. And going to this uni just showed the disparity between going to a uni like Brighton, which is meant for working class people, and going to a university that is supposed to be for the inner city elite. Also, King's has many issues of its own. While I attended King's, there were numerous demonstrations on campus held by Muslim and black students who said that campus security was profiling them and subjecting them to harassment and abuse disproportionately to the white students. Students who protested against the visit of an Israeli ambassador to their campus had their student passes revoked by the uni for 48 hours around this visit, so that they couldn't disrupt the visit and embarrass the uni. In effect, their right to free speech on their campus that they pay upwards of £9,000 a year to access was revoked on a political decision by uni leadership. And I was only at King's for a year, but the problems there were similar to the problems that I now hear about when I come back to Brighton. Everything I've heard has suggested to me that in the year that I left this city and then come back as a young worker, everything at the unis has got worse. At Sussex campus, the police are out of control and are violently arresting students and subjecting them to a campaign of intimidation and harassment. The students there are fighting a serious battle to get cops off their campus. Students citywide are suffering from poor mental health. Students are suffering from lack of secure and well-paying work, from leaky, mouldy and hazardous accommodation. Female students in Brighton and Hove suffer the worst rate of sexual harassment and assault in the whole country. 96% of female students at Sussex will experience sexual harassment or assault on a night out at the seafront. 96%. That is a fucking crisis. And it's being ignored. Our black, Asian and Arab kin are brutalised, profiled and harassed by cops across this city, and they suffer from being victims of prejudice. All students at all the Brighton education facilities, Brighton, Sussex, BIM and everywhere else, are facing these struggles, and you shouldn't have to face them alone, and you aren't facing them alone. There's also the question, however, of why you are facing these problems. And in a word, that problem is capitalism. Education in this country has been privatised, starting with the Blair government and then increased under David Cameron, and we are now seeing the logical end conclusion. When one of your basic human rights, the right to education, is commodified, you become the commodity. And I don't need to explain to this, as many of you are already aware. I've heard students at Sussex say in no uncertain terms, the university's business model is to deceive prospective students into coming to Sussex using the institution's reputation as a selling point. Then once they are in, they stop giving a fuck about you, and you are merely there to pay them money, and that's just tough shit if bad things happen to you. You are being exploited, and so many students are fully aware of this. Literal rent seeking is the main priority of these institutions now, not providing critical quality education about our society. But capitalism is not just an economic system. It is a culture, a way of thinking, and a way of seeing. There is an ideological structure to British capitalism that requires people not to question things or think too deeply about what is going on. And this is reinforced by the passing of laws that make it illegal for school teachers to teach anti-capitalist ideas in schools. We see this in the so-called free speech laws the university still wants to pass that will allow bigots to speak freely and unable to be deplatformed by student bodies. These are attacks on the capitalist ruling class and the ability of working class people and students to gain an alternative consciousness to capitalism and to organise based on that consciousness, whether that is socialism, communism, environmentalism, anarchism, or something in between, or a mix of all. Universities and educational facilities in general are supposed to be places where people from all walks of life and backgrounds can come to grow and learn. People's perceptions are altered when they are exposed to difference, and the stereotypes that our racist media and culture enforce on us from birth are exposed as race-baiting propaganda. That's why the Tories are so terrified of the idea of free education for all. It makes redundant their elite privileged education, and it brings the white rural working class into the cities to meet people of different faith and backgrounds they would never meet if they stayed in their racist small country towns. And I speak about that from personal experience. Free education means people will pursue knowledge, not because it is the only thing that is economically viable, but for the sake of knowledge itself, which is a ridiculous concept to people who only exist to make money at all costs, and that is their only goal in life. The capitalist elite are terrified of what the university represents. The university is a chamber for the meeting of many people who would otherwise represents a chamber for the meeting of many people who they would otherwise have kept divided and turned against one another. But they also see the potential for turning this into a money-making system as well. So they have opted to break the power of the students and the teachers' unions. They have to alter and change the way the university is as a thing itself so that they can then turn it into a profit machine. All the while this is normalised by the banning of anti-capitalist education. When you couple this with the laws the government is passing in regards to the Police Crime and Sentencing Act, the Spy Cops Bill, and the call for undercover cops in our pubs and nightclubs, you have to start asking yourself where this is all going. If we are to resist this turn of events in our society and in our country and fight our way out of this crisis, the students and working class will need to be organised. And here in Brighton there is so much potential for mass action. That energy needs to be organised, or our oppressors, be it the police, the landlords, or the university management, will pick us off one by one. I'm going to clearly and honestly explain my idea of what we should do to unite and organise. Today's demo was called as part of the National Day of Action by Socialist Students, and they have a programme that unequivocally demands that students who have suffered in the pandemic be refunded their rent and fees in full, and that money is given by the Tories because we won't accept any more bullshit and there is no more money. We know the ruling billionaire class have got hundreds of billions of pounds that they hoard in tax-free offshore accounts. They rig the tax system and keep wages as low as they possibly can. If the Tories need to find money to refund students for the shambles and trauma that they've been put through this year because of COVID, they will take that money from the billionaires. And if they won't do it, they should move aside and there should be a party that will. Longer term and bigger picture, Socialist Students are demanding that education be taken out of the hands of people like Adam Tickle and Deborah Humphreys and the other Vice-Chancellors who make obscene salaries while students suffer in substandard accommodation. So yes, there's a programme for Socialist Students and a sign-up sheet. Another thing I'd like to say is that this is not just a recruitment drive for Socialist Students, it's a day of action and planning. And so I would like to suggest that everyone who is here, or maybe a member of other groups such as Reclaim Sussex, Transform Sussex, the Rent Strike, BLM, Young XR, or any anti-capitalist person in general, let's set up something which we can all work within as equal partners to fight for our rights. Today's demo is about building a lasting organisation that will survive longer than just the 3 years that its original activists are involved in it. Something that unites students from Brighton Uni, from Sussex, from BIM and from the secondary schools too, into one cohesive democratic body. The goal being that if uni management won't step up to provide safe and affordable housing, this student caucus will fight them until they do. If they won't step up to take power-tripping cops off campus, this caucus will be a means to organise mass cross-group protests until we get cops off our fucking campus. If they won't step up to provide good quality education to resources, this student body will fight them until they do. If they will encourage white supremacy and colonialist thinking in their curriculum and on campus, then this student body will resist that and fight to decolonise the curriculum. And if they won't step up to protect their female students from rapists, this student body will find ways to make women safer with or without their help, because we cannot afford to wait for them to start doing their fucking jobs any longer. Not when 96% of students are experiencing sexual harassment. You do not need them, but they need you. Without you, Adam Tickle, the Vice-Chancellor of Sussex, doesn't earn £300,000 a year. Without you, Deborah Humphreys, the Vice-Chancellor of Brighton, doesn't earn £250,000 a year. Students have all the power because they are the source of the money. And you guys, and the students at Sussex know that, because when they said they weren't going to pay their rent, the university found ways to take the money out of their bank accounts anyway. That is all they care about, the money, and it's time that this ended. Education is not about profit. It is a human right and should be free and publicly owned. Students deserve to have their human rights respected when on campus and when they are out on the seafronts trying to have a good time. We are going to build something that lasts and something that protects ourselves and our class interests as students and young workers from capitalist exploitation. Thank you.